What are some trade-offs you think Kiwi families kind of have to make in the meantime?
First of all, with inflation being gone, what we really mean is that we've slowed the price increases from a high of 7% to just under 3%. So the prices are still rising at what most people would say is a more acceptable level. The government doesn't have any money. It only has money that it's taken off New Zealanders. If you think the government's going to fix your financial problems, I'm guessing you expect the government's going to take money off someone else and give it to you. The only thing I'd say is be careful what you wish for.
A year until we're ticking boxes. What do you want to put on offer for Kiwis? What are you going to say? How are you going to help them next year?
Welcome to Where's My Money? One man, $1 million of debt, one podcast to find a way out.
Where's My Money is sponsored by Enable Me. Figuring out financials can be daunting. Master your money and stop living paycheck to paycheck. Get practical tips and expert advice on budgeting, debt management and savings with Enable Me, helping Kiwis get money fit. Well, who's counting? I am, kind of, but we're about a year out from the next general election, which means it's time for politicians to start pretending they don't care about the polls, while quietly checking them every 5 minutes. One man who never seems to mind a headline is David Seymour, leader of the ACT Party, master of the one-liner, and somehow the only politician who can make tax policy sound like stand-up comedy. Kind of. Today we're talking money, hard mahi, and what keeps him fired up for another run at the Beehive. This is Where's My Money? Well, thank you for coming in, because you're a busy man. You just showed me your calendar, and it is wild how much stuff you have to cram into a day.
Yeah. No, I went to politics to fight for freedom, and the first thing that happened is I lost all mine.
But you're fighting the good fight. I'll start off with saying thanks for the studio ephedrine. It's helped me twice in the last 6 months.
Massive. It's amazing how many silly little rules we can get rid of that make life a bit more joyful.
Yeah.
Or less crap.
Yeah. And I know you're a common sense guy. You're trying to get rid of a lot of red tape and stuff that is seemingly bogging our country down and making us a bit slower, particularly to recover economically than we should or could be.
Yeah, I think, I don't go too far into it, but there's something about regulation that it is like a safety blanket, and it has reflected our culture. But instead of making us safer, it's actually made us, I think, less able to take on our challenges. And so one of my missions is to change the culture to say, yep, you need rules. Sometimes stuff is just unavoidable. But for the most part, it would be better if we let people be a bit more adventurous. That's what our country was built on, a whole lot of people taking a big risk to go to a faraway place so their kids might have a better life. And yet now we're sort of terrified of WorkSafe coming around. So how can we change that script?
And on paper, all of that makes total sense. It's funny seeing people react to you on social media and they get so angry out of nowhere. They're like, oh, is it a fear of change or fear of something? They're just something that seems so logical, but when you present it, you rack them up for some reason. I don't know what it is. I can't figure it out because so much of this stuff does make sense to me, but maybe that's just me.
I think about it. I think often people have a kind of understanding that nobody's going to rock the boat and everyone's just going to quietly get along. And I'm a person who comes along and says, well, folks, I actually think that we are off course and need to make changes. And a lot of people's immediate response is, oh, shut up and don't disturb the peace. Now, I don't apologise for that. There's a lot of people who see what I'm saying and say, thank God someone's saying it. But it's definitely true that there's a visceral response. And the only thing I can put that down to is in a lot of societies, there's a convention of, no one interrupt. Nobody put their head over the parapet. I do that, and I get a lot of flack, but I do it for causes that I think are worthwhile. Yeah,
I was going to save that till the end of the interview, but I guess we're here now, so let's just do it. What do you say to those the haters? People are online. I've seen some of the comments. They call you socially awkward. They call you an alien. They say you're far right. The Prime Minister at the time called you an arrogant prick. Like, how do you weather that? Does it take a toll on you?
No, because they're not dealing with the truth. First of all, people say I'm socially awkward or an alien. Okay, sure. But you point to the person that doesn't have something about them that could be criticised. So we all win if we just be a bit accepting that we're all different, we've all got our quirks, and we should all be proud to be who we are. That's a better way forward. So that stuff, it doesn't bother me. When people say that I'm, people say you're racist, that really annoys me, because I just say to them, okay, let's deal in facts. You point me to a thing that I've said that you think is racist, and we can talk about it. But even when I've confronted other politicians on live television, and the videos of this are up there, they say, "Oh, well, I, don't know, not a specific thing." Okay, fine. It's a pretty big charge to lay. If you don't have any evidence for it, maybe we could all get on better if you didn't lay it. So, there's people I think are being unreasonable, making criticisms that probably they themselves would be vulnerable to if they were a bit more honest, or saying things that actually just are demonstrably untrue. And so I just say, look, end of the day, sorry you feel that way, but I've got a position that I believe is worthwhile and actually adds a lot of value if you think about it for a moment.
Yeah, and people agree with you because you get votes, don't you? You're in government, and you can't say that you're just some guy on a pedestal. You do have supporters. And to any politician, it is pretty noble that you can weather the storm so much and just try to, as much as you can, get on with the job. Anyway, we're talking about money.
Yeah.
This is a money podcast. You grew up in Whangarei with parents that worked in pharmacy and as a draftsman. What were your earliest memories of money? How did you grow up around money? Because I guess growing up in Northland, traditionally speaking, is probably not a particularly affluent part of the country, but having parents working in those two lines of work, am I assuming that money was pretty stable for you growing up? Or
yes and no. So, we're middle class. We had a family that had money both in our immediate nuclear family. Both my parents were almost always working. They earned good middle class salaries. We had a stable home in a nice suburb, so in all that sense, good. And we also had extended family, grandparents who had a beach house, a second home, a holiday home. So compared with most people, most of history at any time in any place, we were pretty lucky. Having said that, we went through recessions. We had a parent lose a job at one point. That put a really big impact on the household finances, and I think we all felt that. And as children, we were aware that our family was under financial pressure. So I certainly, felt that, and it certainly shaped how I thought about things. It made me believe it was important to study hard, get good grades, and be able to get a job and earn good money.
That's interesting you say you remember how that made you feel, and it has shaped the journey that you've been on. Does it still shape how you think about money now?
I'm sure
Do you
it
find
does.
those connection points,
I'm sure it does. You're going back over 30 years, three quarters of my life. Yeah. I'm sure it does, but not in a way that I sort of think every day.
Yeah.
We must avoid the 91 recession.
Yeah. But you say that you were aware of the toll it took when your mum lost her job.
Mm.
How did you feel you stacked up against other families? Because I guess a lot of kids often, they either really do notice the difference, or often they're so innocently beautiful children that they don't notice the difference when they compare themselves to others. Do you remember that kind of feeling when you're at school? Or?
It was actually my dad in that case. But, a couple of things. First of all, I suspect that we weren't aware of the greatest impacts of it.
Yeah.
So what we were aware of, so my dad, being a hard-working sort of a guy, didn't sit around. He got out, he did a lot of interviews. He ended up getting a job in Auckland, which involved him commuting for, I don't know, I guess it might have been 6 months, it might have been longer. So that obviously was a change. So that became quite real, that, you can actually find yourself working in another city, but also showed that, that's what my dad would do to support the family. So that was probably an important lesson too, although I might not have explicitly thought about it at the time.
Yeah.
So.
When did you start working?
Well, if you count lawn mowing and emptying the dishwasher, very young. But in terms of actually having a job with the PAYE slip and all the rest, when I was 17, I got a job at a sawmill. Because I'd been at boarding school, I couldn't really get jobs. I tried to work at McDonald's, and they said, "Oh, we won't train you because you'll go away." So I actually didn't get a job at McDonald's. So there you go.
Reserved for Luxon. He got the Macca's jobs.
That must be the secret to his success.
Yeah. And you were doing night shifts at that sawmill, eh?
Yeah, it was a wild time because I just hadn't really earned money. I mean, we were getting $7.50, $8.50 an hour. I was proud I managed to negotiate from $7.50 up to $8.50 an hour. So they used to do 10-hour shifts from something like, it must have been 5 p.m. Through to 3:30 in the morning. So you didn't get paid for the half-hour break. And then I'd do 4 of those. It was a 4 times 10 week rather than a 5x8. And then the weekend, I got a couple of shifts just doing different work around the yard, clean-up work and stuff. So I was doing 60 hours a week. And, of course, that meant that I was making about $500 a week, which was just unbelievable money.
Yeah.
For somebody who previously had been pretty happy to get $20 for mowing the lawns.
And were you saving for something? Was there a specific thing in mind, or were you just trying to build?
Well, I was off to uni, so it was all very exciting, and I figured that the more money I had, the easier uni would be. So that was basically it.
Your experience with some pretty hard yakka at a sawmill doing night shifts, has that given you any lessons in terms of your work ethic and how you think about money now?
Well, I loved it because it was basically just like a massive gym. I mean, we were pulling,
hard out.
6-meter boards, 2 inches or 50 millimeters thick and 12 inches or 300 millimeters wide. So, and these are wet. They've just been sawn out of the log, so they're heavy.
Yeah.
And that was basically just like a massive workout. So I kind of loved it. I loved the guys, and we had a lot of fun on the sawmill. But I only did it for about 3 months. Then uni started. So that was that.
You reckon you could do it now?
No, it's a terrible thing, but most of my life I've sort of listened to radio ads about people's bodies slowing down and needing to look after themselves. Oh, losers. And then now I'm like, oh, I see, right.
It's happening. It's happening.
Yeah. I'm sure I could do it, but not at the pace I did then.
So you went and studied engineering and philosophy, like a conjoint degree. How did that influence what you do now in terms of your, in terms of how you see money, value, spending, and then government efficiency? Where did that all come from? Philosophy, or like engineering's a lot of logic-based mathematical decisions. Philosophy's a bit more decision-making involved. But
well, a couple of things. Engineering makes you numerate.
Yeah.
And I think there's some problems with government and the way it operates in Wellington. Numeracy is not a widespread thing, and that is pretty worrying. Trying to get basic questions answered, like how much, if we want a charter school to have the same money as a state school, but a different formula for calculating it, how do we make sure that formula delivers the same money? And I remember I spent years when I was first elected just trying to get the public service to work this out, and it was surprisingly difficult for them. And I was so numeracy right across the board, I think, could make a really big difference. Philosophy is useful because one of the things philosophy does, it just humbles you. You realise that there might not be absolute answers. So you think about something like the mind-body problem. Is the mind different from the rest of your body? Now, if it's different, then there's some sort of spiritual thing going on. A lot of people believe in that. But how could a non-physical thing affect a physical thing? So when you lift your arm up, is that being done by something other than a lot of chemicals interacting in your body, and in particular your brain? And then you say, okay, well, maybe it is just all chemistry and physics, but that sort of seems a little bit depressing, and hence a lot of people say, well, maybe there's a spiritual side. So probably haven't explained that very well, but the mind-body problem is just one of these seemingly simple problems that no one seems to be able to solve. And once you look at that, you think, okay, well, actually, how does knowledge advance? Usually a person comes up with a theory, they test it, and it gets either proven right or wrong. When I see people in politics saying, we have the truth and the light and we will plan this, we're going to take all your money here in taxes, we're going to make these rules, we're going to invest, the politicians are going to invest in the right technology that's going to take us into a clean, green future. And I just think, hang on a second. How do you even know that? And if you do know that kind of thing, why aren't you out making a fortune, with all your knowledge about what to invest in? So, look, numeracy and just being a bit humbled by how little knowledge is available to one person or a small group of people, the nature of knowledge being dispersed, that it requires constant experimentation by many people to make progress, that made me sceptical about centralising power in government.
We know, because you're a member of parliament, you live a very public life. You live a very public life, and we can see how much you earn. And does that take a toll on you in terms of everything being so transparent? We can see everything about your life. Two-part question: what do you do with that money once you've found some time off to spend it? Do you spend your money?
So a couple of things. I mean, I've just, it's a little bit like your question before about does stuff get you down? Well, no, because it's not something I've done. No, every politician has their salary published. Anyone can look it up, put it into Perplexity. It'll find it fast, or Google will find it almost as fast. So that's not something that I've done. It's not a failing. It's just a fact, and facts are friendly, right? So that doesn't bother me so much. What do I do with it? I mostly save, and the best way to save, I think, is to pay off your mortgage, because you basically go through a process of being a debtor and then a saver and then an investor. And if you try and skip those stages, then you might get lucky, but chances are it'll go wrong. So that's a factor. And then in terms of what else do I do? Not a huge amount in terms of getting out and spending. So my partner and I, we go for one big trip every year for about 2 weeks. We just get out of New Zealand, away. Nobody knows, let alone cares who I am. And that's kind of a bit of an essential safety valve, and I think a lot of politicians do that. So that's quite a big spend each year. Other than that, not a huge amount, but I'm terrible at eating on the run. So like, the classic thing is ask the politician, how much do you spend on your groceries? And it's kind of like, well, I dream of sort of having a weekly plan and going to the supermarket on the same day, but it's like, okay, I'll go to school, why don't I go to the supermarket on Thursday? So I'm going to be in Blenheim this Thursday, so probably won't be able to do supermarket shopping then, unless I want to bring it all back from there. So then you kind of say, okay, you just basically eat on the run when you can between this and the next thing I'm doing. Hopefully I'll get through Burger Fuel, but probably won't. Just kind of grin and starve it through the next event.
Yeah, totally. You must be doing that a lot. Where's the next holiday?
Don't know, because we've as has been reported in some outlets, I've got engaged, so we're just
congratulations.
We're just doing a bit of planning for what the next 6 months or so.
Wedding
looks like.
Well, hopefully, if this interview goes well enough, I'll get myself on the guest list, and that'll be fantastic.
You never know. Yeah,
I look forward to it. So I guess shifting away from you now, talking about what's affecting our listeners, Kiwis, the squeezed middle, as we discussed before we started recording. People's food bills, outrageous. Fuel's certainly not cheap. Power's going up. What do you see as the most urgent relief Kiwis need at the moment?
We just need to look at where are the win-wins. If you look at something like the earthquake legislation that was announced, I opposed that 9 years ago. I was the only person to vote against it. Now I'm proud to be part of a government that's getting rid of it. The benefit is an estimated $8 billion, $4 billion of that in Auckland, because people don't have to condemn buildings. People who want to run shops can actually put them into a building and not have health and safety obligations for being in a building that is not at the right percentage of new building standard. And that overall release of basically building space that wasn't being used, I believe will be massively deflationary and make a whole lot of stuff, residential rent and so on, much more affordable. So that's an example of the kind of thing we can do.
It's quite hard for an everyday Kiwi, though, to connect those dots, though, don't you think? Like, in terms of, I want money in my wallet tomorrow because I've got to pay the groceries, but an earthquake legislation disappearing is like, there's a lot of...
I agree, but I'm a passionate Kiwi. I believe in New Zealand exceptionalism. I'm here to make this place work, and so I could sit here and say to you, I don't know, the government's going to do something that's just going to make it easy, but actually you've got to look for where are the genuine wins. So if I look at something like the labelling, fun fact, New Zealanders in their pharmacies have access to about 25% of the products that are available worldwide, and a big part of the reason for that is the labelling and consenting of just over-the-counter medicines and things you can buy in pharmacies is too hard. So Chemist Warehouse, for example, they actually employ a person to basically check if the labels from their stock will be legitimate. There are other supermarkets around the world who, everyone asks why has no supermarket come to New Zealand? Well, part of the reason is labelling. We actually have 36 different laws around labelling products to sell in New Zealand. So as Minister for Regulation, we're actually getting stuck into that, and hopefully in the next year we're going to do a whole lot of simplification. So you get more goods on the shelf, don't have to you can't bring that in because the labelling's not right. Sometimes you'll see products in the shops and they'll actually have a sticker over the label, and that's because of these laws. So, and you just ask yourself, like, if you go to Italy or Australia or just about anywhere really, it's not that you're going to die from going to a supermarket. So it's probably not a big issue. So we're going to deal to a lot of stuff like that. So that's just two little examples of where, red tape and regulation adds cost and makes life less affordable than it needs to be. But I could go on for the next hour, but that's two little examples.
I could probably listen for an hour too, because I do love the fact that you've just identified something that's super easy to understand for a Kiwi. Well, of course, if there's more stuff in the supermarket, that means there's going to be more competition because there's more brands that can compete and drive prices down.
Totally.
You've pointed out, across how many years of being in government, particularly in the last few years, government debt and interest rates are astronomical, through the roof, and it's costing us as a country how much annually? Interest rates on our debt is
about 9 billion. 9.5, I think.
That's eye-watering amounts of money that just comes from where? Our taxes, right?
Yep. Well, basically, there's a little office, it's probably quite a big office in the Treasury, called the Debt Management Office, and their job is to borrow money, which they do by issuing New Zealand government bonds. So they go to the bond market and they say, right, will you buy $100 million of New Zealand government paper if we pay you about 4.5% interest for 10 years or whatever? And the market says no. They say, all right, what about 4.75%? The problem is that over the last 3 or so years, the amount that we're paying's gone from a number with a 2 in front of it to a number with a 4 in front of it. I didn't come prepared with the exact figures, but it's in that vicinity. People can check for themselves. That means that, having a couple of $100 billion of gross debt that we've borrowed used to be costing us a couple of billion a year. It's now costing us closer to $10 billion a year, and that's just money that taxpayers have to pay in order that we can pay the lenders the interest that they want for our bonds. So all of this is sort of made to be mysterious and complicated. It's just a bunch of guys and girls, I'm sure, in an office saying, we'd like you to buy New Zealand paper in return for currency. How much interest do we have to pay you to do that? And because that's gone up, we're now in big trouble. So one thing I try not to do is make it all about blaming the other guys, but just as a matter of fact, when Grant Robertson borrowed over $100 billion, we were paying sometimes less than 2%. Now we're paying over 4%. And as a result, the interest bill has gone from a couple of $1 billion when he started to $10 billion. Now we're dealing with it.
And so, we need to get rid of it somehow, right? We need to get rid of this debt. ideally, or change the terms on it so we can afford it. Just like a mortgage. You refix or you sell the assets, you get rid of the debt.
Yep. So then there's heaps of variables. For example, we can grow our way out of it. A couple of $100 billion of debt is not a big problem if you have an economy which is much larger than the one we have now. As it happens, it's about 40%. So GDP is about $450 billion. Debt, make it $200 billion. There's your 40% net core crown debt. So that's a real problem for us. And growth is one solution. Either grow the population or grow the productivity, or ideally both.
Bit of both, yeah.
Yep. The other thing is, like any budget, I mean, this stuff's made out to be complicated. It's actually very simple. The government has an income, which is mainly through taxes, and some of the businesses the government owns pay dividends, and then there's user fees for different things. Like petrol tax is a user fee, for example. But, at the end of the day, we've got so much coming in, we've got so much going out. This year, we've got 15 billion more going out than coming in. Most of that deficit is actually, ironically, interest. So we're borrowing money to cover the deficit, but then we'll pay more interest. And so then you can either increase your revenue. So next year, I suspect there will be a contest between people who say, well, there are some people somewhere who have done too well and we're going to take money off them. It won't affect you. So I hear some of my political opponents saying, and it only affects 3% of people, which is code for you're going to be okay, we're going to take the money off someone else. I actually don't think that is good values for a country in the long term, because it's about predating on your fellow citizens. People say, oh yeah, but they deserve it. Well, yes, but that's my point.
It's part of the point.
Yep.
It's us versus them.
Yep. Exactly. And the alternative is to say, well, maybe we need to spend less. If you can't do that, and so then you say, okay, well, look, people will be spending nearly a quarter of their lives on superannuation as we go, we live longer. Is that fair? You meet a 65-year-old now. For the most part, a 65-year-old is actually a perfectly capable person. I mean, my dad's still working, 73 now, and he's showing no sign of letting up. So he's 8 years over. I mean, you mentioned when I came in, Winston Peters, I mean, that guy's 80, apparently still showing no sign of letting up. So clearly it is possible for people to work well past 65. There'll be some people who have hard jobs on their body. Let's not let that stop the conversation. Let's ask how we address it.
Totally.
Because basically every year the amount of taxes that goes on super increases by about $1.5 billion. And the other area is healthcare, which, in 2019, the healthcare budget was $18 billion. This year it's $32 billion. So it's gone up.
Nearly doubled.
Yep, over 70% in 6 years. And I'm not saying we should reduce the amount of healthcare available. I'm saying we should ask the question, how is it possible that all the doctors and nurses are angry and striking, everyone's frustrated, we don't seem to be getting the same results, and yet we've increased the spending by over 70% in 6 years? That can't be right.
Where's it all going?
Well, I've got a few theories. One is that the restructuring that was embarked on during the middle of COVID, and I said at the time, the craziest time to restructure a healthcare system is in the middle of a pandemic, but that was done, and there were massive expenses, and I believe just took the focus off how do you get the doctor, the anaesthetist, the anaesthetist assistant, the nurse, the patient, and everyone else you need in the right operating theatre at the same time. If you can hit that, then chances are they'll do an operation. If one of them is missing, they probably won't.
Yeah.
So, just little productivity, things like that. I think there's big questions around how do you make sure that you get the maximum out of every health professional. So, for example, I believe pharmacists could do a lot more prescribing. At the moment, they can do antibiotics for a UTI, they can do emergency contraceptive. If they can do those things, maybe there's more things they could prescribe. If that means you don't have to go to a GP to get a script, that's great. We've already extended the time that a prescription can last. If you're able to do that, then you don't have to go to a GP to just sit down like, I want my script again. Yeah, okay, fine. Then that's great. Let's think about all the things we can do to make sure that every health professional is only doing the stuff that only they can do and not doing stuff that's below their capability.
Yeah.
So
bogging down the system, right? It's filling
Yeah.
it up with admin.
Yeah.
The equivalent of any company saying we're going to use AI to do our simple tasks.
Totally.
Offload the simple tasks somewhere else and get the specialists to do their specialization.
Yeah, so look, it's just to wrap it up. I mean, basically, we've got a big deficit, big debt. It's weighing down. It's putting a drag on the economy. It's putting a drag on Kiwi families. And you either have economic growth so that the debt seems smaller compared with our incomes. You increase the amount of tax that's collected so that the government has more income, but of course that means less income for the rest of the economy, so in a way it defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
Or you find ways to reduce the amount of cash entitlements from one taxpayer to another, or you find more productivity in critical areas such as healthcare, and it may be that we end up doing some combination of those in order to get on top of this.
You're a big fan of privatisation of certain elements of our lives, or particularly within government. You've mentioned, speaking about healthcare, giving people the option to opt out of public healthcare, right? They take a bit of a cash payment and they go and rely on their private health insurance to get them through. Is that something you're still a fan of, or?
Yeah, but I want to be really, really clear what we're talking about here, because as soon as you mention it, people go off in a million directions in their mind and start to really worry about it. So I think the easiest way, if you're in France or Germany or Switzerland, they have quite a different model from us, where you will have health insurance and it's probably private. And if something happens to you, they will take you to a GP or a hospital that their insurance system funds. So a little bit like Southern Cross.
Sure, yep.
And yet, if you are unable to afford the insurance, then the government has a role topping you up so that you can access it. That is generally a more efficient scheme, because you've got people in the industry who say, okay, well, this is our patient from woe to go, so we need to figure out how to make sure that their overall care is more efficient. I'm not sure anyone in New Zealand really has that incentive, because there's always disruption, it's always crazy. There's interestingly one area where we do it that way, which is ACC. So often, your healthcare, if you have an accident, is actually funded by this separate system, effectively with a state insurance company that then funds your hospital or your doctor or whatever. So we're not actually as far away from it as people think. And I just say, look, maybe one of the things we need to consider is how they do it in Germany, how they do it in Singapore. The way we do healthcare is not the only way. And then people say, oh, but it'll be like America. It's like, no, I mean, arguably that's the worst healthcare system in the world. Why do you think we'd want to copy that one? We need to actually start looking at some of the other options around the world that are more efficient, get better results than us, and say, well, maybe it's time to put these options on the table.
Back to the cost of living, and the government doing a bit of work to get us out of a bit of a fiscal hole, so as a country we can be better, and therefore inflationary costs come down, and hopefully we all reap the benefits. What are some trade-offs you think Kiwi families kind of have to make in the meantime, because it's not going to be a flick the switch overnight and all of a sudden, hey, the inflation's gone, we're all good now?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, with inflation being gone, what we really mean is that we've slowed the price increases from a high of 7% to just under 3%. So the prices are still rising at what most people would say is a more acceptable level.
Yeah.
However, the last 4 years of inflation is still baked into the price of everything you pay. I mean, we haven't reversed it and taken the price back down. So you're absolutely right. People are still under huge pressure. And then you say, well, what trade-offs should people make? And I don't think I'm the right person to give that sort of advice to people. So there'll be people who have different priorities, might be regarding their children or their health or their housing or their long-term investment and retirement. There's so many different things, and I'm just in favour of letting people choose. And everyone have their own answer. They don't need mine. So. What
about the people who say it's all up to the government, though? Because surely there's an element of personal responsibility that needs to come into, when times are a bit tough, you got to make some calls and make a few sacrifices. But there are a lot of people out there who say, well, it's the government. It's your job to fix it, not mine as a household.
Well, I'll just say a few things about that. I mean, first of all, the government doesn't have any money. It only has money that it's taken off New Zealanders. So if you think the government's going to fix your financial problems, I'm guessing you expect the government's going to take money off someone else and give it to you. The only thing I'd say is be careful what you wish for, because your position in life may change. And then you might find there's a whole lot of people trying to take it off you. Or there might be other people who already think that the money should be taken off you. And whenever I hear about a wealth tax, I mean, they say, oh, well, surely that'll just be wealth. No one thinks that they're wealthy themselves, so it'll just be someone else. Well, just ask these politicians, what do they mean by wealthy? Could it be someone with $1 million of equity? Well, that could be just about anyone who's made a decent dent in their Auckland mortgage. So, you just got to be a bit careful about going after people and trying to take their money, because as the old song goes, when you point the finger because your plan fell through, there's 3 more fingers pointing back at you. Just be careful of that divisive approach of, let's see if we can take from someone else. The other thing I'd say about the government, apart from the fact that it doesn't have its own money, it's just a group of people. Like, believe me, not to bag any of my parliamentary colleagues, but I can assure you that people who sit in Parliament are not, vastly smarter than you or I or anyone else going about their life in this country. So the idea that they have some great power or insight, they just don't. And I'll give you a classic example. James Shaw, who I would regard as one of the smarter people to have been in Parliament, was the main driver behind this green investment fund under the previous government. They dropped, I think, $300 million to apparently invest in, new technologies that would reduce climate emissions and so on. Long story short, they invested in the right stuff. We're winding the fund up. They would have made more money, to the tune of about $300 million over the 6 years, had we just put it into a KiwiSaver. But that money's gone now, right? Like, we'll never get that back. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, we're paying interest on the debt for the money that government's borrowed. So, when people say politicians can solve all their problems, I'd say, look, the government doesn't have any money of its own, and it doesn't necessarily have better ideas than you. So probably it's going to come back to you sooner or later.
Do you think KiwiSaver's working hard enough for us? A lot of the guests I've had on the podcast, we talk a lot about retirement and trying to get on top of not in terms of just planning for it, but just thinking about retirement, because it does happen eventually. Even if you're 30, you're going to retire eventually. The sooner you start planning for it, the better you're going to be. But a lot of people, even if they've had KiwiSaver their entire life, their KiwiSaver is not going to be enough to retire on without some supplementary form of something, whether it's an investment or hidden cash under your bed. Do you think KiwiSaver's working hard enough? Do you reckon we need to turn up the dial a little bit as Kiwis? Look,
it's an option, but I'm a bit of a contrarian on this, and people say, how do you? But I look at the likes of David Laws and Michael Littlewood, both academics and experts in the area of savings, and the point they make is that if you take KiwiSaver or any kind of government scheme, even compulsory schemes, you can force people to save in KiwiSaver. A lot of people do save in KiwiSaver, but it goes through that whole thing. You become a debtor, then a saver, then an investor. If you are paying down your mortgage slower than you otherwise would have, so you can put more into KiwiSaver, then you may not be better off. You might be. Depends on whether your KiwiSaver is getting a better return than your mortgage interest rate. But your chances are you're not better off. Once you allow for the risk involved, because paying off your mortgage is risk-free, then almost certainly you're worse off. If you've got credit card debt and you're pumping it into KiwiSaver, you're crazy, because you're not going to get 20% on your KiwiSaver, and it's that difference between interest rates that matters. It's also true that KiwiSaver is not the only investment vehicle. I mean, I don't know if more people piling into residential property is what this country's economy needs, but there's people who may have done better doing that than
it works harder
investing in equities. Yeah, well, exactly. So, I mean, I'm not for or against KiwiSaver. I don't think it should be made compulsory, because you've got to allow for those substitution effects. And I think, depending on your own circumstances, you've really got to work out your own plan, have a look at, what are your likely needs, get financial advice if you're able to, and start working towards a plan. Because once you know what your plan is, your anxiety kind of goes away, and that's really in itself a bit of a tonic.
That's the message we've tried to plug probably a million times in this podcast. Is it's all about having a plan, and you can't have a plan unless you're really skilled up or you've got someone on your side. When it comes to the education piece, where do you sit on that in terms of where financial education sits? Are we too dumb when it comes to money until too late? Should we have it in primary schools? First lesson on compound interest at the age of 6. Where do you sit on it?
Yeah, I think this is a real tragedy that the education system is almost allergic to teaching anything commercial. And I suspect that's because the education sector itself is not commercial. If you're running a school, then for the most part, you are running a branch of the Ministry of Education. Now, I know there'll be people saying, well, what do you know? There's maintenance budgets and operating grants, and I'm aware of how school finances work. But if you're a teacher, for the most part, your pay is negotiated centrally. Your equipment and your books kind of show up. Your classroom's looked after by somebody else. Your students show up, and you don't get paid more or less depending on the number of customers. So, the education system is quite different from running, say, I don't know, a hair salon, where you're very focused on all of your costs and all of your revenues every day.
Yeah.
So it's kind of not an environment where you'd expect to learn about commercial reality. Now, the tragedy of this is that if you come from a sort of old school left-wing position, which I've got a lot of sympathy for, I'm thinking about the folks that came back from World War II and said, never again, we're going to give our children opportunity. One of the first things you want to do is make sure that kids who don't have a lot of financial education in the household can get a leg up from the public education system. So ironically, when the public education system doesn't teach about money, it gives an advantage to children whose families maybe do trade in shares and do talk about stuff at home. So I believe it's a real failing, even from a left-wing perspective, not to have a lot more financial and commercial education in schools and from an early age. And I just make the point, I got a very good education. I went to a very good school. I went to a very good university. And yet it wasn't until after I left that I understood that the value of a company is the net present value of future income. Everyone should know that. If you don't know that, you should look it up. It's the most fundamental thing you've got to understand about investing is, how much income in the future is this going to generate, and what are the factors that affect that, and therefore is the asset valued at high or low, and how's it going to keep getting revenue so my investment's safe. But I didn't know that, despite going through a good high school and a good university. That's a real failing.
How do we fix it, though?
Well, it is being somewhat fixed by what the government is doing with the curriculum.
Yep.
But I would just get out there and say, look, if you're on a board of trustees, if you're a teacher, if you're a principal, you are not helping children by keeping them away from financial education. If anything, the opposite. And, when it comes to things like business and entrepreneurship, I grew up with this idea that entrepreneur was kind of a sinister word, that if somebody was making money not by working but by ideas or by investing, that maybe that wasn't a good thing.
It seems a bit snake oily on the surface.
It did. There was just a subtle inference I picked up as a kid. Nowadays, I think, okay, well, what's the number one determinant of do people live good lives in any given economy? It's the amount of capital investment. Somebody with a big automated milking machine can produce far more milk than someone doing it with their fingers, but you've actually got to save up money and invest in a lot of stainless steel to make it happen. Now, I grew up thinking that if you sort of made money by having money, that was kind of cheating, and real people did hard work, worked their fingers to the bone to produce. But actually, as I think about it now, the smart thing to do is to invest as much capital as possible so you don't have to work your fingers to the bone, you can produce more, and best of all, if you make some money out of doing it, then that's a win-win. And that kind of win-win thinking, I think, has been missing. There's far too much of there's only 5.3 million of us. We've got to stop all this divisive thinking,
Yeah, totally. And, money that works hard for you means you've got more money back, and money doesn't answer everything, but it gives us options, right? It's the freedom to make more make more choices in our lives that we're in control of instead of being controlled by the money, right?
Yeah, and look, if people want to live a bohemian lifestyle, it's just all about each other and being at one, like go for it. But equally, you need to respect other people's rights. And I can't remember who it was said, look, I've been very rich and I've been very poor, and on balance, I prefer being rich.
I know which one I'd choose. Yeah, totally. Well, we've got a year until we're ticking boxes. What do you want to put on offer for Kiwis? What are you going to say? How are you going to help them next year?
Well, I think more than anything, just the idea that we should have one law for all and one future together. We're not going to solve our problems while we allow identity politics to divide us, and we're not going to solve our problems if we're not prepared to take a logical and practical approach. And I look at the stuff we're trying to do, deregulating everything from earthquake standards to building materials to labels on stuff in pharmacies, and the way we regulate early childhood education and do health and safety. All of that ultimately is designed so we spend less time filling out forms and dealing with red tape, and more time working with other New Zealanders to create win-wins that solve problems that produce more wealth. So it's a message of unity, of acceptance of people for who they are, and also unity of purpose of solving the considerable problems I believe our country has. If you want someone who's going to tax someone else and take the money off them and give it to you, I'm sorry. I think we've got to reject that. One of the most corrosive messages out there that politicians are sharing is that your problems are caused by other people's success, but if you vote for me, I'll take the money off and give it to you. Actually, what we need to do is realise that we're all on this together. We need to create the conditions for problem solving and prosperity.
I feel like you've done that before. You're pretty good at it. You've got the messaging down pat.
Oh, thanks. Well, we're still sort of figuring out what exact policies we'll offer, but I think the things that people will want to do with a smaller, more efficient government. There's a real frustration with the fact that government just doesn't seem to be as responsive, even when you're in control of it, So then you say, okay, well, maybe there needs to be a smaller cabinet, fewer ministers, fewer departments, but way more focus on these are the 5 things that need to get done to make New Zealand fly.
Final question. When you got into politics, did you see yourself ever stepping into the deputy or even prime minister seat? Was that always the goal, or was it just to try and make some positive change?
I've always been a policy nerd, so I've been driven by policy. I remember when I got asked, John Key said, "Do you want to be a minister?" And I thought, well, yes, it would have been a pretty big pay rise, actually. If I'd become a minister back in 2016, it's about 50 grand a year, so I got 100 grand before the election. But I couldn't be a minister and do the end-of-life choice, the euthanasia bill. Looking back, do I regret that decision? Absolutely not, because making that change, I think, made New Zealand a more humane, caring society. It was given over 1,000 people now the ability to choose how and when they go, their time, their terms, their timing. That's far more powerful than earning cash being a politician, which is a dumb strategy anyway, by the way.
I work in radio. I know all about it.
Well, you and me both. Yeah. So anyhow, I never really thought it was about status. I'm not sure if you want status, politicians also a dumb strategy for that.
Yeah.
So no, my basic view is we have to make sure that the policies we left behind enable New Zealanders to succeed on their own terms. Whereas if you want a job with high status, being a politician on a big Pacific island is not really up there. So,
yeah. There's probably more Elon Musk-y kind of stuff you can aim for if you want to go for status, right? But
yeah, there's
tech companies.
Pluses and minuses there.
Yeah, true. Hey, thanks. I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy
It was
man.
a great chat.
David Seymour. Will common sense and cutting of some red tape be a political survival strategy? Time will tell. 12 months-ish from now, he'll be back on the campaign trail trying to convince us that smaller government really does mean a bigger future. Let's just see if my mortgage or my grocery bill is any smaller. If you like the chat, follow Where's My Money and send it to someone who thinks all politicians are the same. They might change their mind. Or they might just start asking the same question I've been asking this whole time. Where's my money? Huge thanks to Enable Me for sponsoring this episode of Where's My Money. Navigating finances can be tricky. Take control of your finances and break the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck. Get tips and insights on budgeting, managing debt and saving money with Enable Me, helping Kiwis get money fit.